Hi, I'm Maria Thea Harris or Velo Sews on social media. Welcome back to Sew Over 50's podcast on Sew Organised Style. Grab a cuppa, support this podcast on Patreon, and relax with us. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel, like and comment so more people can see as well as hear from our podcast guests. Today's guest is Micah Clasper-Torch, and she's my very first punch needle guest. She's developed a lot of resources in this area, so let's watch and listen to Micah now. Today, Micah is the very first punch needle guest I've had on the podcast. Welcome, Micah.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
For people who are watching this on YouTube, you'll see behind Micah there are a lot of really gorgeous pieces that she's done. And for people who are listening to this, I'll have those images on the podcast website for you to have a look at. They're very nicely done. I love the
Thank
colors that
you.
you've chosen.
Thanks. Lots of color.
Lots of oh, look, it makes it all worthwhile to put all that effort into it. I saw in your press kit that you started your first ever punch needle coat in 2018,
Yes, that's right.
and that was the same year that the Sub 50 Instagram account started. I just thought I'd put those two together for you.
I love that. I love that. It's when it originated. Yes.
Yeah. When was your actual first needle punch experience?
My first experience was also in 2018. I
Right.
had seen the technique on Instagram, like so many other people. I think in late 2017, it was Arona, who runs the Buku account up in
Yes.
Canada.
Yep.
And I had seen it and I was really surprised because it was so modern looking. And I was slightly familiar with traditional rug hooking from growing up in New England, but really only as very old-fashioned looking rugs. And so when I
Yes.
saw her doing, fresh new things with beautiful colors and just more modern designs, I was inspired and my interest was piqued. But I wasn't actually interested in it at first as like a whole craft that I thought I was going to get so obsessed with. It was really with the plan to integrate it into one coat, into one fashion piece. And it was very hard for me to find information about how to learn punch needle at that time. There were very
Mm.
few teachers and places to learn online. So it took me a while to find a teacher in 2018, and that's when I first learned and then dove into attempting to make that first coat.
So when you were doing your research, was it called something else in the past?
So punch needle stems from the traditional craft of rug hooking. So punch needle rug hooking is now kind of technically, if I'm trying to describe the specific craft that I practice, because there are a few other types of punch needle, like punch needle embroidery, which is actually an entirely different craft from punch needle rug hooking. It uses the same type of tool to push loops of yarn through backing fabric, but it's a different tool, different backing fabric, different fiber. So rug hooking's history is really the history of punch needle. And so then over time, people have achieved a similar look using a punch needle, although people also are still hooking rugs, of course, as well.
Because this is the podcast that I put together for Sober 50, and
Yes.
they've got a whole depth of experience. So hearing the history from you puts it into perspective as to where you've come to now. Yeah.
Exactly. And people, I mean, I have a huge demographic of people also over 50. And a lot of people are very familiar with punch needle, either from maybe growing up, they saw their mother, hooking rugs, or in the 70s when punch needle embroidery became really popular, they
Yeah.
might be familiar with those kits from back in the day. So it's been really beautiful to see people rediscover it now through this new kind of modern lens. And then also, of course, a whole new generation of young people who weren't familiar with it before. So it's a really great range of people who are interested in the craft.
So you've
Yeah.
worked in fashion, art, and textile design for 15 years. What was it that started you going down that path?
I always knew I wanted to study fashion design for college. So when I was in high school, I was really interested in sewing and design, but I didn't really learn that until I went to college. Only at the very end of my high school time did I take a sewing class and attempt to make my first piece, which was my prom dress as a senior in high school. but it really was an opportunity for me through Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City for me to really dive into all of that world. And I just fell in love with it, especially the making things by hand, which is, of course, not why everyone goes to fashion school, but FIT is such a technical, hands-on school with draping and pattern making.
Yeah.
And because I didn't have that background, I was really grateful to learn those skills, and realize that I just loved the process of being able to turn fabric into something wearable and beautiful. That really was my fashion journey. So it was actually less about the fashion industry. And even
Right.
though I did end up then working in the fashion industry for a handful of years after graduation, I realized pretty quickly that the industry wasn't for me, but that
No.
making things and clothing would always be a part of my life and something that I would find a way to do no matter what job I was in.
So after FIT, you went to the Fashion Institute of Technology and can't say the word in Milano.
The Politecnico di Milano. Yeah, that
That's
was
it.
actually my junior year study abroad. So I spent a year
Okay.
in a program there in Italy, and a great school, over there as well. And it was interesting actually during that time that I was the focus was on knitwear. And so they actually had a class where we were taught to knit by hand, and I was hopeless at it. So people, I think, often think that somehow, because there are a lot of folks who come to Punch Needle from knitting or crochet, because, when you have a yarn stash, you got to come up with other things to do with it. But it's always funny to me because I'm so impressed by people who can knit and are very good at it. And to me, I was hopeless at it. So um, but it was during that time in Italy that knitwear was the focus. And so that was actually my first experience working with fiber instead of just fabric. And while I wouldn't say I took to it right away, it's interesting when I look back on it and having had that experience with both weaving and knitting, kind of informing my idea of fashion and textiles and how you can actually, the idea of creating a textile that you're then turning into a garment instead of just purchasing fabric.
So then in 2018, we're moving quite along now.
Yeah.
When you found the tutor, how did you go about finding that person to help?
Well, I looked online and through Amy Oxford's website, so the Oxford Rug Cooking School in Vermont, they had a handful of trained instructors. And so
Mhm.
the closest person to me that I could find was based closer to San Diego. I'm in Los Angeles and she was in Solana Beach, which is a few hours south. So it took a while to find a time. And like months later, I was finally able to take a train down there and have a one-on-one class with her, which was really amazing. And I fell in love with it immediately. And I was kind of blown away by how, kind of with this one simple, straightforward technique, it just seemed like there were endless possibilities. And she was the one then who told me, if you're really serious about this and you want to learn even more, you really should go train with Amy in Vermont to study this at the one place that really teaches this craft, since it's not something that's taught at any art schools and
Yeah.
not in any textile or fiber programs. And so I did. And so then in 2019, I signed up to become an Oxford certified instructor. And I trained under Amy with a small group of us in that class. I learned so much. It made me, of course, look at that first coat that I had made and think, oh, okay, all my stitches. I learned so much, and then also I learned so much from that about how to teach the craft, and so that was a really formative experience for me, and really set me on the path to then doing what I'm doing now, which is both the artistic creation but also the teaching.
My next question was about finding tools to punch needle. Is it hard to find them? A lot of people who sew will go to op shops and thrift shops and they'll find tools there. And those old kits that you talked about, they're
Yes.
probably out and about. What's your view on that?
Punch needles are definitely something that can be found from a few solid providers. I think that people don't realize until they try it how much the right tools make all the difference. So I use the Oxford Punch Needles. That's my tool of choice. I sell them on Punch Needle World. They can be found at amyoxford.com, which the Oxford company's website. And there's a bunch of other people and places who also will sell Oxford punch needles. They were designed by Amy, who was a professional punch needle rug maker for like 15 years. She was using an older version of the tool when she was doing that professionally called the Craftsman punch needle, or sometimes known as like Minerva Lee punch needle. It has a few different names.
Yep.
Um, and those can still be found. And those are actually very cool tools if you can find them, but they're not being produced anymore. And they can be a little finicky to use and adjust. But those are fantastic if you can get them. Like I've gotten some on eBay or found them at different sales like that. But I do find that when it comes to day-to-day punching, the Oxford tool and the newer punch needles are best. I collect vintage punch needles, but they are a lot more difficult to use. So I don't use them. They're beautiful to look at and kind of fun to play around with, but not as easy as the current tools that can be found.
The good thing is that in the book that you've just published, part of that history is at the start of your book.
Yeah, I
So
really
can we
wanted to
see
make
it?
sure that that was in there. And I think that that's a piece that can sometimes be overlooked. And kind of I don't want punch needle to be presented like it's a craft that just appeared out of nowhere. It's part of this really amazing kind of rich history of textile tradition. And so I thought that was important to have in there. I wish that section could have been longer. I'm really into the history of it, but I just wanted to give people a little taste, so they could understand how it all connects.
So you've got Punch Needle World that you established. What was that like when you put it together, and how do people receive it now?
It's actually interesting. Punch Needle World came about because when I first started sharing the punch needle coat through my Clasper-Torch Instagram account, people were really curious about, of course, what is that? What is that technique? How do you do it? And so I was getting a lot of questions about it. So it started to become like I was just answering a lot of questions about the technique and how to do it. And then after I trained and became certified as an Oxford punch needle instructor, I decided I wanted to create a separate account where it was dedicated to answering those questions and teaching
Yep.
people. So I created the Punching in the World account at the very end of 2019, and I didn't really kind of ramp up until early 2020. But it was interesting timing, of course, because it was
Yes.
pre-COVID that began, and people were really happy to have a place to ask all their questions to. And I started, doing little videos and posts about the different techniques. And then when COVID hit, it was just, kind of lucky coincidence at that time that everyone all of a sudden was sitting at home looking for something to do. And so that really helped the craft and that account specifically take off.
So then, how did you develop the idea for the book?
I actually was not ever intending to write a craft book. Um, I had a lot of people asking me about the coats. Would you ever share patterns for that? How do you do it? And to be honest, the thought of teaching people the sewing aspect was what was really intimidating to me. So I love teaching people punch needle, but I would get a lot of questions early on, like, can you teach me how to punch a coat? And I'm like, well, you don't punch a coat. It's not like you're knitting a sweater where the technique of the knitting is then turning into the piece. You learn to punch and you punch a textile, and then you're constructing it into a coat, kind of as you would any other coat if you were doing it all by hand. And I think that was a really interesting thing for me because it was this barrier that while I had studied construction and fashion design, after so many years, I didn't have the fluency, I didn't think, to know how to then teach people sewing. I felt confident to teach punch needle. So that felt very intimidating to me at how I would ever translate what I was doing into step-by-step instructions. But as time went on, I became more interested in and more open to maybe finding a way to try to explain some of these techniques and share that
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yep.
And then I actually had a publisher reach out to me in late 2022. And a craft book publisher reached out. I still wasn't convinced at that time that I wanted to do it at all. I wasn't sure if I did want to do it, whether this was the right publisher, but I had a call with them. And through that call, it kind of started planting that seed and kind of opened my mind to that possibility. And I ended up going with a different publisher who I felt understood kind of the sensibility of what I wanted to do, because
Mm.
I really didn't want it to feel like a lot of the other craft books that I had seen. I wanted it to feel, my background being in fashion and art and design, and the books I read being fashion books and art books. I wanted to, I had kind of this vision for a book that would teach people the techniques, but that would also feel like a coffee table book.
Mm.
Um, and now what I'm realizing, it actually is kind of like a cookbook, one of those really beautiful cookbooks where even if you don't intend to actually make anything in it, it's just so pleasing to look at. Because that's more my type of book. Like, I am not using cookbooks. I am not cooking any type of fancy recipes, but I really love, I think cookbooks are some of the most well-designed, beautiful books out there. So that was kind of part of the inspiration. And then that set off, this whole journey of needing to come up with projects, 15 projects that
Mhm.
I could teach people. Um, and that was an interesting experience because I think about 11 of the projects in this book are things I've never made before. The first time I ever designed and made them was for this book, which is really exciting because there's not a lot of newness and things that people won't have seen done in punch needle
Right.
before, not from me or not anywhere else. So I'm really excited to start to share the projects and luckily they all worked out. That's always the risk too with punch needle. It takes so long and you punch the textile in the exact um, pattern. So instead of using a pattern, you use a sloper or a block. So you're punching in the exact shape, which means if it's too big or the seams don't match, you can't just take in a seam or cut a little bit off. It needs to be very precise. So there was a bit of anxiety around some of the projects where I spent a lot of time punching, and then only once I was putting it together, it was like, okay, this is it. It's either going to work or it's not. And luckily, everything for the most part worked out as I imagined. So I can't wait to share all those projects with people.
I do a lot of sewing, so it was the coats, and I would have been one of those people saying, "How do you punch needle a coat?" And now I
Yeah.
understand that you need to punch needle segments to then put it together for
Yes.
something. And in the case of the projects, you've got collars, cuffs, bracelets, things like that, achievable small pieces, so you don't have to worry about sizing, and they look
Yes.
really beautiful.
I'm really excited for people who have sewing skills and that background in construction
Mm.
to look at this book. And I'm excited to see what they do with it. Because the way I kind of have explained to people in the past who have asked me about the coats, I'm like, well, if you learn how to punch and if you know how to sew a coat, like out of other fabric,
Mm.
then you know how to put the two together. But as you can imagine, if someone's never sewn anything before, jumping right to a coat that is entirely sewn by hand with set-in sleeves and everything is a bit of a leap. So that was the other piece with this is when I started doing the first coat, I didn't realize that it would have to all be done by hand. So I thought the most time-consuming part of it was going to be punching all the pieces.
Hmm.
And I thought I would just sew it together on the sewing machine and that would be the easy part. And once I got to the end and realized very quickly, of course, this textile is so thick
Yeah.
that you can't sew it together on the machine because if you were to do so, once you opened up that seam,
Mm.
there would be about an inch of the monk's cloth showing between the punch needle. In order to get close enough, even with the zipper foot, you wouldn't be able to have that seamless look of the loops. So that's when I realized, okay, like this is the real challenge. The real work begins when you actually start sewing the pieces together by hand.
Mm.
And luckily, the projects in the book start with some very small, achievable projects, as you said, like a bracelet or a belt where there's a lot less sewing to be done to kind of get people used to that process before they advance into some of the larger projects.
Hmm. Yeah, great. Thanks for putting me straight on that.
My specialty was in tailoring techniques, so that's also why the coat was appealing to me.
Mm.
So I love working with wool. I love making coats and blazers. And of course, then I moved to Los Angeles where nobody needs wool coats for most of the year. But that's my favorite thing to make. And I also will make dresses for myself, usually simple things like that. But a little fun fact about the book is that when I styled the looks for the book, so there were two models who we used to photograph the different pieces, and I really tried to showcase a range of styles and ways that you could kind of put these pieces together so people knew that no matter kind of what your style is, there could be a
Yeah.
way that these punch needle pieces could fit into your wardrobe. But about five or six of the other pieces that are used in the styling are also things that I've made. There's blazers that I've made. There's a wool coat in the book. There's a couple dresses that I've made. So it's kind of a fun little thing that's stuck in there that it isn't stated anywhere in the book, but there are many other pieces in the book that are also things that I've made that aren't punch needle.
So, of the projects in your book, which is the most wearable to you?
One of my favorite projects in the book, which is something that I did develop beforehand and decided to then share in the book, the design for a handbag, like a carry-all handbag. I have
Yep.
an example of that here. This is a different design than the one in the book, but it's the same pattern and construction.
Mm.
And I carry this around all the time. So punch needle obviously can be quite heavy and maybe seasonal. So for Los Angeles, a punch needle vest isn't something I would be able to wear all year round. But I love that I can carry the punch needle bag all year round. So to me, that's one of my favorite pieces that I think is accessible, whether or not someone thinks they would want to wear a punch needle vest or a punch needle crop top. But the handbag is something that anyone can make their own and wear with any outfit. So I love
Yes.
that project.
So, for people who haven't done punch needle before, what's the best project to start on?
The book projects are sort of loosely in order of
Right.
easiest and most accessible to the hardest.
Yep.
So if someone's never punch needled before, I would recommend starting with the bracelet or the belt project,
Hmm.
just to get used to the process of actually creating the punch needle textile. Because that's something that can take a little time to master. And one of the things I talk about in the book is that when you're punching in order to create something that you then construct into an accessory or a wearable, what you're really doing is you're creating the textile. So the quality of
Yeah.
your punch needle technique determines the quality of your finished piece. So really taking that time to understand how to create a sturdy punch needle textile, to create a textile where your loops are all evenly spaced and you've kind of gotten a handle on how to create the designs that you want, that will give people the confidence to then create larger pieces so that they're not spending days or weeks creating a punch needle textile that then they're trying to construct and maybe they're not happy with that finished look. So I think that the smaller projects give that ability so that they're not taking days to punch, but they're ones that you could actually do the punching within a day. And so then you get right to the sewing and kind of learn what that feels like to construct before you spend weeks punching something that you'll then construct into another piece.
Yeah. And the nice thing is depending on what your aesthetic is, if you're starting off with smaller pieces, you use
Yeah,
the colors that you want to wear. So,
yeah,
if someone may not like the sort of colors that you've used, there's nothing to
yeah.
stop people from using whatever color they want.
Exactly. That's the beauty of punch needle in general. Of course, all of us who love working with fabric and fibers, I mean, color is just so much a part of it.
Yeah.
I really want to encourage people to do their own designs that speak to
Mm.
them. And the one thing I tried to do, because I tend to stick with a lot of similar color palettes,
Yep.
I really tried, however, to make one project in every kind of color palette possible for people to maybe see something that speaks to them. If you don't love pinks, there's going to be something that's green. If you don't love greens, there's something that's blue. I had never actually punched with purple yarn before until this book, and the handbag that I did for the book is purples, and it's one of my favorite pieces. So it got me out of my comfort zone, and hopefully people see some colors and designs that speak to them.
Wonderful. So Micah, if people want to get in contact with you or find out more about Punch Needle, where should they go?
They can find me on Instagram. I'm at Clasper-Torch, which is my last name. I'm also at punchneedle.world on Instagram. And the Punch Needle World website is punchneedleworld.com. And my personal website, micahclaspertorch.com. So lots of places to find me. And I love answering questions for folks too, if people DM me or reach out via the website.
Thank you for letting us know where to find you. I'm really pleased that you've given me your time to talk about Punch Needle. And
thank you so much for having me. This has been a real pleasure.
Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
This episode of Sew Over 50 podcast on Sew Organised Style was video and audio produced by me, Maria Theoharis, in my sewing room with permission of Micah, sound by Kanife on YouTube. Many thanks for the ongoing support of the podcast Patreon contributors. Their ongoing support every month enables me to develop these podcasts for you for free. You can subscribe to Sew Organised Style podcast, but with an S, not a Z, on all good podcast apps. Make sure you go back and listen to our free Sew Over 50 podcast archive on Sew Organised Style podcast. Direct message Sandy and the editors at Sew Over 50 on Instagram to contribute to the ongoing posts and challenges the team promote to the community of over 53,000 followers. I look forward to joining you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.